Hey everyone. So I have been reading a lot in February, and I'm realizing we're halfway through the month, and I've read like a ton of books so far. So I'm gonna do a part one, and I'll probably do what I did in January, and I'll do like a part one and a part two, and then I'll do a challenge kind of update as well. To start with, the 52 Book Club had a mini challenge this for February, and I have read the 3 books for the mini challenge already. So the first of the mini challenges was a book by a Black author in your favorite genre. The second was Be Mine Valentine, so I mean basically a romance or anything you could tie to Valentine's Day. And then a book by an author born in a leap year. So the first book I read this month was King Nix by Kirsten Backus, and that she was born in a leap year, which is perfectly convenient. This is a book that I just really, really enjoyed, and I think it was for the mood, if nothing else. It's essentially, gothic, kind of mystery, but really essentially a kind of feminist retelling of history about the wife of a fairly famous, pretty famous actually, I don't even know what you'd call him, like not an occultist, basically someone who studied sort of weird things that happen. So like crypto scientist, I think was the term they used at the time, but, things like raining blood or like random things falling from the sky. And so he was really famous apparently around the turn of the century, the early 1900s, and he was married, and we don't obviously know much about his wife. So this is sort of a speculative fiction of what, his wife her life might have been like. Being kind of in the shadow of a relatively famous man, in a time when women weren't really, didn't have much of a voice. So I loved the cover. I liked the writing style. Like, in terms of the plot, it was fine. It was a fairly, typical sort of gothic, kind of creepy, kind of a mystery. I wouldn't say that, like, it was anything necessarily new or exciting or even like innovative, but I did really enjoy it, and I think a lot of it was just the mood, the style of writing. It just really worked for me. So basically, the plot is she and her husband are invited to this island with this wealthy rich man who might be a patron, basically, of her husband. And because it's during the Spanish flu, they are sort of quarantined into these cabins with this other couple. He's a psychiatrist, and again, psychology was sort of new at the time, and his wife. And we find out that the main character, when she was younger, she worked for her husband's family, and there was another woman that she was friendly with, and then she disappeared. And then now there's some girls missing from this household. And then there's some like clockwork, like creatures, people. I don't really, like, it kind of isn't really that important to the plot, but it's there. And so again, like plot wise, it was fine. I just think personally, I just liked the setting, and I liked the writing style a lot. So I ended up giving it a 5. I can see a lot of people just being like, well, it doesn't really do anything unique necessarily, but it has a very literary writing style, so some people I think might find it boring. I like that style. So that was the first thing I read this month. And actually that comes out at the end of this month. It's not out yet. I read the arc. And then I read How to Be Eaten, which was recommended to me, I'm pretty sure by Honest Book Reviewer. And this is kind of a retelling of some famous fairy tales, from the perspective, basically it's modernized as if the girls and women in these fairy tales are in a support group for trauma. And I really love the premise, and I loved the first half of this book, and then the second half got a little too much into the like fairy tale speculative kind of fantasy element, and that just, I think, took me a little out of it because it was less, it was a little less like contemporary sort of trauma commentary and just a little too fantastical for my taste. And then also there was the whole thing with like reality TV, which was valuable and like interesting, but also like I've kind of seen it done. I really love that show, Unreal. So if you like that, you might like this. It has some of that element to it. But overall, like I did enjoy this. It's fairly short. And like I said, I loved the first half, and then the second half was just kind of not my genre really. So I ended up giving it a 3, but, mostly just because I tend to get sort of turned away from books when there's too much like fantastical. I'm realizing like sci-fi fantasy are not for me unless they're heavily like tied to reality. Like I love A Song of Ice and Fire, but basically beyond the dragons and I guess like the ice zombies, like it's pretty much just a historical fiction. It's just a medieval like palace intrigue kind of thing. So like that's kind of I think the maximum for me of unreality, like things that are out of reality. I need like heavy reality based, which is fine, I mean, there's still good fantasy and sci-fi out there. It's just, I tend to be very, very heavy on, like, I think my favorite books just tend to be contemporary. So, the next one was another arc, and I have heard great things about this from a lot of people. So I was so excited. I mean, a ton of people that I really value their opinions have been giving this like 4 and 5 stars, and I was like super excited. I didn't like it. And it's tough because one of the reasons I didn't like it, it was just like a personal thing. Like, so this is a story about a woman who is trapped like in a snowstorm with her kids, and there's someone in the house. And it's very unsettling. The way it's written, it's definitely very visceral. I really enjoyed that part of it. Like, I thought it did a great job. The writing is really strong, and it did a really good job of like just making you feel uncomfortable, and it was unnerving. And so all of that was fine. The problem I had with this story was the overarching like plot of it, because it just became so much like, so like a lot of this story is about like the unreliability of the narrator, and she's had a lot of things happen, and she's even starting to question reality. And her husband, we don't really know what's going on with her husband, but so she's had this trauma in her life, and like a lot of it, but it started to get to the point where like, and like the cops don't believe her, and they're like, and I think a lot of that commentary was good, but I started to feel like I understood why the cops didn't believe her, because it's like everything in the world seemed to like go wrong in this person's life, and like there were just so many things going wrong and so many like things happening that I was kind of like, it loses its credibility to me, because like, yeah, I believe like a home invasion is a definite like thing that could happen, but it like became so over the top, and then I was just kind of like, all right, now it's just starting to get unrealistic. And like that, it just didn't work for me, because I was like, I think if she had just toned it down a lot, like like I said, the writing was good, the story was good. It's effective, and I can see a lot of people loving it. It just, for me, I was like, okay, too much. Like, there's just too much going on. Too much trauma, too many horrible things happening in this one person's life. It starts just becoming like, it's not like a little life, like that kind of, like, a lot of horrible things. It just felt like unrealistic. You were trying to do too much, and I feel like if she had just toned it down, I would have loved this. So then moving on to another kind of mystery thriller about trauma and unreliable narrators, was Everyone Who Can Forgive Me Is Dead. And I think this is Matador Books, which might be part of St. Martin's. So I'm not going to talk much about it because I know there's like a, like a boycott of, I think that's still going on, of St. Martin's because some stuff that happened with an employee of theirs. But I also, like, I'm not 100% sure if this particular imprint was involved, and I also, like, want to make sure that, like, I do acknowledge there was a good book and, like, for their author, because I don't know, but it might be her first book. But so anyway, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. It's about a girl who in graduate school, there was a mass killing basically. And she kind of was she was the like prime, witness. And, we're finding out like as, 10 years have passed and we're getting up to the 10-year anniversary. And like maybe the stuff that she said wasn't totally true. And, her kind of dealing with that. So, I enjoyed this. I thought this did a really good job of like exploring trauma in a realistic way. And I thought the way it portrayed anxiety and PTSD and sort of like that inability to kind of know what's true and what's not. And I thought that it was well handled. Then moving on to another thriller that was, I don't know, this was a mess. This is The Resort. This is about like two women and there's like some murders and I mean, it's just like halfway through the book, it just gets into this like, it's basically just the writer being like, Xanax is evil and Xanax makes you do horrible things and then you can't remember anything. And I'm like, yeah, that's not how Xanax works unless you're taking it wrong. And like, I mean, I'm not sure that the character was taking it right, but I just like, it just kept talking about Xanax and like, and then, like, one of the characters was raped, and then her, like, vengeance of her rape was to, like, go after this other woman, and I don't know. It just did not work for me. Like, this was just, I, like, could not understand the characters. I was like, these characters are ridiculous. Like, it just didn't work. I have a hard time. Like, sometimes I think thrillers just go too far. All right, so then I read Your Shadow Half Remains, which is like a post-apocalyptic, post-pandemic. It's kind of like Bird Box. The pandemic, what it does is if you look at people, it like makes people like violent and then they like kill each other. So there's very few people left, and it's this woman who is alone in this like sort of like I think it's like a gated community, but like she's in this house, this vacation community by a lake, and then this other woman shows up and they have sort of a relationship, but like she can't look at her. And I really liked the writing here. It's a novella, so it's fairly short, and it's one of the things I just really enjoyed about this was, like I said, the writing was really solid. It obviously reminded me a lot of, COVID and like the sort of pandemic feeling of like that isolation you feel. Yeah, so, I mean, I enjoyed it. Like, the end's a little ambiguous, which is fine. I mean, it's a novella, and I just think it had, like, a nice sort of unsettling feel throughout the book. And then I haven't actually finished The Stand yet. This was part of my Sir Chong swap, and I am about 30% into it as of now. I am determined to finish it by the end of the month, so I'll come back and fill you in. But right now it's like taking forever, but hopefully I will finish it, and then I will be back to tell you about my thoughts on that. Okay, so yeah, I will be back with my Stand feelings. I don't really want to make too many like judgments until I'm done with the book. So, because obviously there are times when you think one thing and then the book takes a different turn. So, the next one I read for the month was If We Were Villains. And apparently a lot of people compare this to The Secret History, which I have yet to read. But I did decide to read this one first, because I had the ebook and it was easier to access. So, I loved this book. I could not get enough. Like, I couldn't stop thinking about it. This is probably like my favorite of the year so far, or at least up there. And what's interesting about this book is I could very easily see why people would hate it and think it was very pretentious and in a different mood. I might have felt that way, but for some reason, it I don't know, I loved it. So basically, it's about this group of kids. So there's 7. Well, they're not kids. I mean, they're college students, but it's like 7 college students in their last year of college. It's like a Shakespearean, it's like an arts conservatory. And they are the 7 students in the acting program, which is all Shakespeare focused. So if you're not a Shakespeare person and you're not a theater kid, you might find it very annoying because they're constantly quoting Shakespeare to each other. They're speaking in Shakespeare, like quotes. It's a lot, but I loved it. Like at first I was like, is this going to irritate me? But I just loved the characters so much. It worked. And I feel like it just hit the edge of without getting to be too much. Like I feel like if it maybe was more of it, I might have started to get irritated, but I think it just hit the level of like how much I could tolerate, and still enjoy it. So basically the book opens with this guy, this cop coming to visit him in prison. And he says, I really want to know what happened. And so the guy in prison says, I'll make a deal with you. I'll tell you the truth once I'm out. And as long as you promise there will be no repercussions, and I'm just telling you so that you have the answer. And so that's what they agree to. So the book basically from there follows this chronological timeline, essentially, of this last year for these students and the events that happen, the relationships they have, something that occurs throughout early in the, I would say relatively early in the book, maybe in like the first third, something happens and then it kind of starts to like destroy their relationships. We don't necessarily know exactly what happened. So throughout the book, we're kind of getting little bits of information slowly revealed until we get the full story at the end of the book. And I would say it's like, it is a mystery. It's not like super hard to figure out. It's more about like how much is revealed, and as it's revealed, what we're learning about the characters, less than like, ooh, whodunit kind of mystery. And it's definitely more of like just a literary character study than it is a mystery. But there is that mystery element, so that's kind of intriguing, you know, for if you're looking for something that kind of like to move the plot along a little bit. But really what I loved about this is just the characters. They were so complicated and like unlikable but likable, and just everything I love in characters, where they felt really fully fleshed out, they felt flawed, they felt authentic. You know, all of them had things you liked about them, but then they obviously all had issues, and that's just, to me, felt like reality. I have to be honest, I was a theater kid in high school and a little bit in college. I've always liked theater, and obviously I was an English major, so like my enjoyment of it may also have a little bit to do with the fact that, like, you know, I've read all the Shakespeare plays. I've been on stage, you know, I love the theater, and so there may be, you know, a little bit of a personal thing there, but I adored this book. This is one of those books that I bought, you know, I had it as an ebook, and I'm trying to get a copy of, because, like, I just loved it. I want to reread it at some point. I am going to try to read, you know, The Secret History is on my 24 for 24, so at some point I'm going to try to read that, see, you know, if I do think they're similar. I don't know if they're similar, if it's just that they're dark academia, so who knows. But I love this book. So then moving into my book that was for my mini challenge, which is a book by a Black author, in your favorite genre. I went with Lone Women, which is actually in like 7 genres, because it's kind of a mystery, thriller, suspense, horror, Western, historical fiction. So I was like, well, this covers it all. But I really, really loved this book. And part of it is like, I loved the writing style. It was just very engaging, very accessible. And I'm not a Western person. I don't really like a lot of Westerns. I don't like things about Westerns. And this is essentially about a Black woman who buys a stake in land, for like part of like the homestead, like she's homesteading. And so like if you work the land for 3 years and you survive, you get to keep the land essentially. And so thing is, she brings with her this steamer trunk, and there's a secret. And I mean, we learn it fairly early, but like probably maybe halfway through the book, a little less than halfway. And the only thing I didn't like is like, this is a little too supernatural for my taste. And again, this is something I've brought up obviously earlier in this video, and I've brought up several times. I'm just not like, I end up finding myself less interested when it starts getting out into the supernatural. But I still thought that like the supernatural here was also sort of almost like a parable, metaphor. I enjoyed the most, I loved, I would say 85% of the book. And even the supernatural stuff, I think, was kind of making social commentary. It's kind of like the Babadook, if you've seen that, where the monster is also sort of, a bit of a, metaphor for other things. And so I kind of, I liked those elements, even though they were a little outside my normal realm. But I am interested in reading more by this author because I loved his writing style. And, I know they may be a little bit more like traditional horror, so they may have some supernatural stuff. But I found his writing very engaging. And so I feel like I'll like them even if they're not like perfect for me. Because I really enjoyed this. I just thought it was very well written, and just was very engaged, and found the characters interesting, and just found the overall plot very appealing, even with some of the supernatural elements. So then the last of the mini challenges was Valentine's Day, and I had done a buddy read with Sir Chonk. So we'll see what he thinks of it. As far as I know, he still hasn't finished this. I read it in a day. I couldn't put it down. And this is Love and Gelato. And I mean, I knew going in that I was probably going to like this, because I had picked this after I'd read The Afterlife of Holly Chase. I was like in the mood for like more like YA sort of romancy things. And I'm not usually into romance. And so I was like, well, maybe, I mean, some of the romance I do like is all like YA contemporary. So I was like, well, maybe I'll like this one. And it's about a girl whose mom has died of cancer, and her mom's dying wish essentially is that she goes and lives in Italy with this friend of her, the mom's friend. And she moves to Italy, and we find out pretty much right away that this friend is her father, that she'd never known who her dad was. So she's in the summer between sophomore and junior year of high school, so she's about 16, and she's in Florence. And so, I mean, I'm a sucker for things that have to do with travel, that have to do with especially like European cities that I love, that I visited, and so, that naturally just appeals to me. And this was cute. And what I liked about it, and I think what I've found is I like the romance that have a little more, I don't want to say like darkness, because it's not dark, but like a little more sad, a little more just like realistic with people's like life. And so in this case, like when she gets there, a friend of her mother's and her dad's gives her the journal her mom had written in the year she was in Florence. And so she's going through this journal and kind of visiting the places her mom visited and sort of connecting to her mom through this journal, and also like discovering how her mom fell in love for the first time, and she's also possibly falling in love, and and it's just, I don't know, it was really cute. I really enjoyed it. I didn't want to stop reading. I flew through this book, and I mean, it's super tropey and super like predictable, and I didn't care. I thought it was really cute, and it made me very happy, and I enjoyed it. And I'm going to read other books by this author because it was cute, and I liked it. So then moving on, I read The Housemaid because everybody is like obsessed with Frida McFadden. So I was like, all right, I got to read something by her, and not everyone, but a lot of people have told me The Housemaid is one of her best. And I've seen a lot of people give it 5 stars, and I'll be honest, I almost quit this book like 3 times in the first like 30-40% because I could not stand the main character, the maid. I just thought she was super judgmental. She was like, she works for this very toxic boss, and I was like sympathetic to her boss because I was like, she's so frustrating in her like the things she thinks about her boss and like how judgmental she was. But then at about like 40% or so in, the book kind of takes a turn. And from there on, I was kind of hooked. I was totally hooked. And so I ended up giving it like 3.5 stars because the first like 40% was like very frustrating. And I was angry through like all of it. I was like, I don't want to read this anymore. These characters are horrible. Like, I didn't really like the writing that much. And then the second half, I just really enjoyed. So I kind of wish there was more of it. So I think I'm going to try, I know over at Fiction Addictions, they've given me a couple recommendations. So I'm going to try some others. I might at some point read the sequel to this because now that I know the character, maybe she'll be less annoying in the first quarter of the book. But yeah, I really liked the second half of this book, and I liked the direction it took. And yeah, it made me happy. But I do wish like the first half was less frustrating. So then I read Bluebeard's Castle, which is just not for me. It was very heavy on like the camp, and there was a lot of like erotica, and like I get what like the author was doing. Like she was kind of going with like tropes and kind of throwing the tropes like on their heads, but like this woman's just falling in love in like 5 seconds, and like I couldn't figure out when this was even set, like because there were points where I thought it was set in like the early 1900s, and then I thought maybe like the 1950s, but then I think they had like phones, and I don't know. I just had no idea what was happening, and I was just like, and there was too much like graphic sexual stuff, and I'm just not into the graphic sex stuff. So yeah, it wasn't for me. The next one was You've Been Summoned, and this was actually really disappointing for me because this was pitched as an interactive murder mystery, and so I got the ARC, and I was so excited to read this. But I don't know how it's an interactive murder mystery because it's basically just a book. Because like there's like some things like at the end of like sections, they're like, all right, so you've had some clues, but like that's kind of how all books are. And then there were like documents, but like there's a lot of books that have like newspaper clippings or interviews or files, and so I didn't really get it being interactive. I thought it was gonna be like a choose your own adventure or like, I don't know. It just, and then unfortunately, like the cover's gorgeous, and a lot of things I wanted, like I liked parts of it, and I feel like I didn't realize it was self-published when I started out, and I'm not like anti-self-publishing. I just do feel like a lot of self-published books like really need stronger editors. So there were some like grammatical errors and like spelling mistakes and things that like did get me very frustrated. Although I'll be honest, like I see them plenty of times in like published books. I just feel like it's less common, and it's less frequent. But there are like actual like plot points that like didn't make sense. And I feel like a strong copy editor would have made this a million times better. Because especially in a mystery, like, you really need to be very, very careful with the details, how they're provided, why they're provided. And so there were things I'm not sure if they were supposed to be red herrings or if they were just a mistake. And so it was just very confusing. And then the rationale behind the crime didn't make any sense. And so, I don't know. It was just a little frustrating. And like I said, I'm not anti self-publishing. I do feel like sometimes I get kind of frustrated because I think, like, I would rather if people were just like, hey, I'm friends with this person, so I'm going to give it a very positive review and just be transparent about that, because it's like I'll see something and people are like talking up a book and it's got a bunch of 5-star reviews, including on BookTube and on Goodreads, and then you read it and it's a total mess, and then the same people are giving like traditionally published books 2 stars, so it's not like they're just super nice. And so I'm like, I don't know if you're friends or if you're just being overly nice because it's self-published. And, like, that's fine, but I just be honest about that, so I can at least, when I'm like, oh, everyone loves this book, at least I'm not like, I feel like I get bait, it's like a bait and switch, you know, like, and I don't like it. It's sort of frustrating to me. I'm like, it's fine if you love a book, but I just feel like sometimes people are like, oh, so, I mean, I thought this was solid, but like like I said, I'm going to be honest, like, I think if it was traditionally published, some of these mistakes and these issues, and there was also 2 timelines, and I don't know that we needed both of them, and so it felt like 2 completely different books that really didn't need to be connected. So there was a lot of stuff that was good here, but I just think it could have been a lot better. So, and then I read Between the World and Me, and I already did a review on that. I thought it was very impactful. Highly recommend this. I feel like it should be required reading. Yeah, and then there are a couple more, so I'm going to come back. I got to work, so I'll come back after work. Okay, back from work. So I had left off talking about Between the World and Me, which I had planned on reading already anyway for Black History Month, and then turns out it's banned, so I used this. I was talking about this with my banned book challenge, so I've already kind of gone over it. Like I said, it was pretty powerful and definitely worth reading. The next thing I read was None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell, and this was like super, super hyped up, and this is the first thing I've ever read by Lisa Jewell, and I know she's, like, very, very popular. There's only a couple that have seemed that interesting to me. So I haven't read anything by her before, and everyone was really hyping this one up. So decided to read it. It's really well written. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, I guess it's a thriller technically, because it's kind of about, like, you know, some crime, and there's, like, a little bit of a mystery in terms of you're not sure what's actually going on, and it's being kind of slowly revealed to you. But the thing I think that for me was missing, I did like it. I thought it was really well written. It was very compelling. I was interested in reading it, you know, and I thought the characters were well developed. I thought everything was handled very well. Like, I have no complaints about anything about the book, except I just felt like something was missing. And I think for me, I know this is kind of tough. You know, I read a lot of mystery thrillers, and so usually they kind of go off in there's usually a twist, or there's some kind of information that's surprising. And this is more just like, I think, more of like a character study, kind of dark look at like psychology, probably more like traditional thrillers, where, you know, everything wasn't about the twist. And I think now there's sort of like so many writers like going for like having all the twists. And, you know, to be fair, I feel like sometimes they end up becoming silly. So the fact that there wasn't a twist was a little disappointing, but also kind of nice, because it was just nice to read a book that was like, I don't have to try to predict what's going on. I can just enjoy reading it and seeing how it reveals itself. So, definitely a really solid read, and I don't have any problem with it. And I think if, like, if there's another one that comes out and the story sounds interesting to me, I definitely would read more. I'm interested. I think I don't remember the title now, something about when she disappeared or something like that. And I was looking through some of her other titles, and like that really interests me, so I'll probably check that one out. So I definitely, and I can appreciate why people really like her. I mean, her writing's very good. So, yeah, I'll definitely read more of her work, in the future. And I kind of think it's kind of nice, like I said, like Ruth Ware doesn't do a ton of twists either, and I really like her. I like Lucy Foley. I don't think has like too many twists either, and I like her writing. Alice Feeney is like my favorite, and I think she's very, very good with twists. But sometimes, like I said, sometimes twists end up being like kind of bad and end up making the book kind of over the top or cheesy. So, I think I was just kind of going into it thinking I was going to get a twist, and then was like waiting for it, and then there really wasn't much of one. And also the title kind of gives a lot of like, what's kind of going on from the beginning, based on the title. So I mean, again, interesting. I did like seeing how it unraveled, and I did like the characters, and I found it compelling. So I'm going to check out more of hers at some point. And then the next two I read were part of the banned book challenge, so I'll be talking about these in their own videos. But I read In Tango Makes Three, which is apparently super controversial book about, some penguins. It's a children's book, a true story about two boy penguins who raise a chick in the Central Park Zoo. And then Captain Underpants. I read the first one, The Adventures of Captain Underpants. I gotta be honest, I was not anticipating how fun this would be. I thought it would be kind of like a cute book for kids. I wouldn't understand why it was like, offensive, but it wouldn't really be for me. But it was like way funnier than I was anticipating it being. It was an absolute delight. And yeah, so I'll be talking about that at some point as well. But that's where I'm at so far. I'm still reading The Stand, and then I have some other stuff. I think I have 6 or 7 more on my hopefuls for the month. I don't know if we'll get through all of them, and I don't know. I mean, I may end up like swapping into other books. So I've gotten everything that was like my guaranteed I needed to read, and I read a lot of the other ones that were on my maybe to read. So I feel like I made pretty good progress, and then added other stuff. So yeah, we'll see how I do for the rest of the month, and I'll be back with an update in a few weeks. All right, and a Captain Underpants and Tango Makes 3 videos as well. So, all right, see you around.